Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fireside chat. We're just going to give a few more minutes and then we're going to start shortly. Okay, so we're going to start. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us, and thank you for giving us your time. So today we're going to talk about Grace's latest book, which I'm going to introduce Grace shortly. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Gerald Wu. I'm currently the Vice President of HR in TMX in Canada. I'm based in Canada. I'm also the visiting research fellow with the London School of Economics, working with Grace. And we're very happy to have you joining us today. So today we have Dr. Grace Lordan joining us, and she's the Associate Professor of the London School of Economics and Behavioural Science. And she also heads up the Inclusion Initiative at the LSE. Before we start, before I turn it to Grace, it would be great if you can test up the chat function. If you can enter the country in which you're from so that we know where everyone's coming from, that would be fantastic. Mexico, fantastic. Switzerland. Italy. London.
I think it's another Switzerland.
Yes. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. So it looks like we have a very international audience today. So Grace, why don't we turn it to you to talk about your new book called Think Big. Maybe we should start with, can you tell us a little bit about your inspiration? What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so I mean, the start of my career was really working in corporate companies and really trying to get them to make changes that would get the best out of all their talent. And I'm a behavioral scientist, so everything was experimental, and we would look to see whether or not it worked. And then based on that, I would give these corporate talks, kind of like we're here tonight, where I would discuss the type of changes that I was making and why they're helpful, you know, for women, for people of color, for other groups that actually might be falling behind, and for individuals in general. And quite often I would get, you know, questions from the audience where they would say, actually, you know, I don't really have much power in my organization. So while it's really interesting that you're doing these things at the organizational level, they don't really help me. I'm falling behind, and I you know, I don't necessarily know why. And that really piqued my interest in thinking about behavioral science from the individual perspective, and what do we actually know with respect to moving people's careers along. And you know, Think Big then was born from that. Essentially, it is a roadmap for using behavioral science to become more successful in life.
So obviously, Grace, there's a lot of career management and planning book in the marketplace. Can you share with us, you know, what set your books apart, and just give us a brief introduction? What is behavioral science?
Oh, that's really good. So let me start with an introduction to behavioral science. So I think if you come to the LSE, one of the first things that you learn is that there are two different thinking styles when you are internalizing the idea of being a behavioral scientist. So the first is very, very fast. You're on autopilot. It's your habits, essentially. And the second is very, very slow. It's very, very deliberate. And you're really paying attention to your decision making. And I think what's really interesting is that the estimates that we have suggest we spend about 80% of our time in that fast brain, in that habit-driven brain. So one of the kind of big tenets then of Think Big is, how can we get people to actually slow down, embed good habits, very small habits, so they don't feel a big yank from their usual routine, but embed these good habits into their day, and then allow them to get to where they want to go in their career in the medium term. And then if I think about why Think Big is different to other books on the market, that's really the first reason. So there's lots of books on the market that suggest to you that you can change your career in 30 days, and you can change your career in 2 weeks, and you can change your career in 3 days. that is, think big is totally different. Think big suggests that for the majority of us, we can't upheave our lives in that way. You know, we have bills to pay, we have children to look after, we have other things, other commitments in our life. So really taking the perspective that getting your habits right today that point you in this direction of a big thinking goal really lends itself to you being successful in the medium term. So it takes you a bit longer to get there, but the crux is you're actually much more likely to be successful, because one of the reasons that human beings quit things and that they fail is that they take on too much too quickly. So kind of thinking big and taking small steps, as the title says, allows you slow down, embed these good habits, and get to where you want to go in the medium term.
Fantastic, thank you. Before we proceed, I forgot to mention, if the audience have any questions at all, please use the Q&A question, and I'm keeping an eye on them, and so is Grace, and we'll try to answer all of them as much as possible. So Grace, why don't we start talking about, as we think about career, how would you define success? What is success?
So it's interesting. So if you read Think Big, one of the first things that I talk about is that I would love to get rid of, job titles. I would love to get rid of people focusing on a particular lifestyle that they really want to lead, and get people thinking about what are the tasks that they want to do daily as a job. And for me, success is when you're doing tasks day to day in your job, not 100%. All of our jobs are going to have elements that we don't like, but the majority of tasks we enjoy and we see their purpose. And to me, that's what success is. So that people are actually in jobs that they're happy, and they're also earning a living from doing something that they actually love.
So in terms of applying that concept in your career, Grace, so how did you decide to select a career becoming academia versus a practice professional?
This is a really great question. So if you read Think Big, and if you read actually, some of the stuff that I have out kind of in Financial Times and some other outlets, you'll know that I call myself a flawed behavioral scientist. So the lessons that I give you, I learned the painful way. So I didn't choose my career in the way that Gerald might actually think. I didn't have this plan. But what I have done since I've started thinking big and taking small steps myself is craft my job at the London School of Economics. So the tasks that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, the majority of them I really love. And if you read the book, you'll know that I hate meetings, pointless meetings without agendas, so I tend to skip those. I love spending time with my students, and I don't necessarily like admin. And as time has gone on, I've managed to change my work tasks to really align with my preferences.
Fantastic. So given your exposure to international audiences, and we have an international audience today, have you noticed any difference between how different countries will define success in terms of narratives?
Absolutely. So I think, if you come to the UK and you come to London, job title is really important, actually, and status is really important. And I think as you move around the globe where we have more collective societies, people do pay much more attention to jobs that require cooperation, jobs that have caring responsibilities. But I think nonetheless, if we strip away the kind of habits that we've embedded in our society because of the culture, I'm pretty sure regardless of what country you're sitting in tonight and what country you were born in, if you focus on the tasks and you focus on what do I actually enjoy doing and what do I want to spend my time doing, that's the ultimate way to get you to doing something that you love for money, rather than focusing on job titles or even focusing on, I want to be caring. So, okay, you want to care for individuals, but what do you want to be doing on that day-to-day basis?
Fantastic, thank you. I want to, as part of the HR professional, I talk to many employees and actually many people in different stages of their career. Some are thinking of going to be high up with important titles and money, and some feel really stuck in their career. So what advice would you have if for someone that are rethinking of their career, what advice and what steps would you have for them?
So I think if you're rethinking, so that there's people who I work with who, if you told them that you were unhappy with your job, they would say you should quit your job. You should leave today. You should do something different. And this is something that I would never say. So I think the first thing is that if you find yourself unhappy in your job, you should figure out what are the tasks embedded in your current job that you enjoy doing. And then they basically become these kind of transferable skills that you will take somewhere else. And then think about if you could actually change what you're doing now, what would it be? And if you have no idea, looking around and looking at people who you think you might actually like their job and finding out what it's about. So finding out how do they spend their day, how do they spend their 9 to 5 or 9 to 10, and getting practice at those activities before you ever take the leap is again kind of a way of changing your life without putting yourself too much out of your comfort zone. So when I kind of recommend changes in individuals' lives when it comes to careers, I'm really always talking about how can you put yourself outside your comfort zone so you're just on your tippy toes. You're just making these small changes rather than plunging people into something that's entirely different. So whether you're kind of plateauing and you're looking to accelerate, or whether you hate your job altogether, I think that's pretty sound advice.
So in terms of job change, you talk about small changes, but one of the critical barriers for people changing careers is fear or risk aversion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I feel, because you've changed careers, Gerald. So before I answer, I mean, did you have any risk aversion?
Definitely. I mean, definitely it's hard to leave your current career that you're very comfortable with. For those who doesn't know, I just accepted a job. Actually, I just started a job. This is my 3rd week in my new job. I mean, there are times I have to reflect back and say, why did I change? it take way more effort in changing, and what if I fail? But for me, I didn't completely change. It's still in the field of HR. I changed company, I changed industry, but I think is, as you say, taking those small changes, not completely changing it, and just take a leap of faith for me.
So when you were thinking of changing your job and you were kind of imagining the things that could go wrong versus now that you're actually in the job, do you think that the pre-period, the anxiety period, is worse than when you're actually in there on a day-to-day and you have certainty over your tasks?
Absolutely, because once you decide to change your job, the deal is done. You can't go back.
Yep.
But as you're still thinking, should I go? Should I not go? That's the period that is actually most agonizing.
And I think this for me is kind of one of the most fascinating concepts in behavioral science is, loss aversion. So what will I actually lose when I make the change? But more than that, anticipated loss aversion. So, the evidence tells us that when we think about an experience ahead of the time, we get the emotions, we get the happiness, we get the anxiety that goes along with that. So for example, there's really good evidence to suggest if you book a holiday today, that you'll have this lead up period where you're anticipating it, that's worth something in addition to the time that you'll actually have on holidays. Now, if we're anticipating something negative, the evidence suggests that the anticipation of that negative event is much worse than experiencing the event itself. And the reason for that is because human beings are very resilient and they're very adaptable. So Gerald has adapted, perfectly well to his job, despite maybe having kind of some misgivings just before he took the plunge. And I think for people who fear failure, really internalizing that is very, very important. So internalizing the fact that the reason that you're feeling failure is because your anticipation is overestimating the costs of failure. And that if you actually make a change and it doesn't work out, it's not going to be as bad as you actually think.
So in the book, you introduced the concept of me plus. So can you give the audience, what is that all about, and how is that applied to career management?
So me plus is who you would like to be if it all worked out. So if you imagine yourself in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and you were in a job doing particular tasks, what would that job be if it all worked out? So there isn't any room for the anticipated loss aversion that we actually spoke about. And the reason that I encourage people thinking about me plus in Think Big is for 2 reasons. So the first reason is that it's been shown that simply visualizing a goal in this way and really having an idea in your mind about what that actually is makes you much more likely to get there. So makes you much more likely to push forward. So that saliency is really, really important. But the second, the idea of creating a me plus brings your future self forward. So, a lot of what we actually have to do to change our careers, to shake things up, to accelerate, involves pain today. So if you were actually in the pre-call, I was complaining to Gerald that, I've been working incredibly hard and I'm really looking forward to having a break. And that pain essentially is what I'm actually feeling now for things that I'm investing in the future that have these uncertain outcomes. So visualizing the me plus allows us to rebalance things so that the person who we want to be in 5 years comes into the room today and makes them much more present based, which makes us much more likely to take action and take those small steps that will get us there.
One of the key things that you definitely spend a lot of time in your book talking about is different biases that may hinder us or may actually help us to advance a career. Can you talk about the concept of biases and how does that hinder our career?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned in the beginning this idea of fast brain and slow brain. So biases and heuristics are really what happens when usually what happens when our fast brain is in mode. It can happen with the slow brain, but let's think about the fast brain. When we're making a decision and we're factoring in things that we shouldn't necessarily be factoring into that decision without realizing it. So for example, if you've ever been in a supermarket and they were playing French music throughout the supermarket, you might have found yourself buying, French wine or French bread, for example. And these experiments have even shown that if they switch the music up to German music, that you're much more likely to buy German wine. So you don't necessarily know that you're doing that. You're in autopilot. You're linking something that has nothing to do with your purchase together, and you're making that decision. If you take that into higher stakes, it means, for example, that you might end up buying something, making a big purchase that you didn't necessarily want to do. So you'll notice if you look on shopping carts now, that when you go to pay, at least if you're in London, they give you lots of options where you can actually offset the money into the future. And again, that's playing with your biases and your heuristics. And if you're a behavioral scientist, one of the things that we will say is, it's all very well to know about biases and heuristics, but because these happen in the fast brain, they are habits, they're unconscious, circumventing is very, very difficult. And there's 2 chapters in Think Big that talk about circumventing your own biases. So how do you actually kind of get out of your own way and make sure that you don't make bad decisions? And another chapter about how do you deal with other people's biases in your career that might actually be holding you back.
So talking about those biases then, so why don't we talk about some of the internal biases that you talked about in the book? So for those audience who have not read your book, what are some of the common biases that you have seen in terms of people trying to manage their career or plan their career?
So, I mean, do you have a favorite bias, Gerald?
That's definitely a risk aversion bias.
Yeah.
Is a big one for me, and very often the reason why I like that one, because people often felt stuck and they often felt powerless of doing anything, and one of the things that is preventing them is definitely fear.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, risk aversion is a classic bias. We see differences by gender. It does tend to hold people back simply because they overestimate again the cost of actually getting things wrong. I like confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is the tendency for us to search out people and information that kind of confirms our beliefs. And we see this again as something that actually holds people back, in that they tend to get career advice from people who are too much like them, who have too much sight of the same opportunities, so basically the opportunities that they know already, and will essentially kind of sit with them and talk about the fact that they're quite unlucky when their career actually goes the wrong way around. So circumventing that is actually really easy, kind of paying attention to who do you actually go to get career advice from? Are they very much like you? So are they the same age, the same nationality? Do they go to the same university? And if the answer is yes, adding some diversity to your boardroom as a way to circumvent, the confirmation bias. Another one that I really like is, people often fear putting themselves out there because they worry about if things go wrong and how others are actually going to look at them. So they really, if you think about the spotlight effect in behavioral science, it suggests that whatever I do, whether I fall on my face, if I give a bad public speech, if things don't go exactly the way that I want them to go, the people who witnessed my failure, or the people who witnessed things going wrong for me, are very unlikely to remember it because they're all caught up in their own mind. And even if they do remember it, they're much more likely to have empathy and sympathy versus any kind of hatred. And again, I think if you bring that into your career, it means, you should be putting yourself out there. You should be kind of trying to move forward, safe in the knowledge that if it doesn't work out, the chances of anyone remembering are really small.
So I have 2 follow-up questions based on the answers you just. The first one is about failing. Yeah. So obviously we talked about trial and error in our career, and there are times that we accept a job or start a job that we're not so good at and didn't do well. So if someone is failing at their current role right now or their career, what advice would you have for them in terms of trying to get out of that loop?
I think the first thing is to kind of really sit back and get advice from people who aren't going to confirm your beliefs about yourself. So really talking to them about what's actually going wrong in your career. Are you really failing? What's really interesting actually is that, people's self-perception of how they're actually doing in their career often doesn't align very well with the managers and other people who actually are in power with respect to moving them forward. So figuring out whether or not the failure is actually a true failure. And then the next thing is thinking about what are the opportunities that I can see that will allow me to become unstuck. And if I can't see any opportunities, again, seeking out diverse advice to find opportunities that will actually allow you move forward. And I think, I've been starting to do research recently about this idea of kind of a 2-doorway system, to kind of coin Jeff Bezos's phrasing. When we think about decision-making, there's the ones where we step outside and we can't go back through the door. And those are kind of decisions that we really, really want to spend a lot of time thinking about. And then you have these revolving door decisions where I can actually go back in and go back out. But what's interesting in the research that I'm looking at the moment is that a lot of people overestimate the number of going out the door and not being able to go back decisions, and they underestimate the amount of revolving door decisions. So I think for anybody who's feeling insecure in their job, figuring out what are the changes that I can make now that might end up actually being success and making me more successful, that might give me a shot of something better that I'll be happier in, without going through the door and not being able to walk back.
Thank you. Before I ask the next follow-up question, I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, you can either post it in the Q&A section or in the chat, and we'll try to address them as soon as we can. So the next question is about giving advice. Because in your book, you talk about external narrative and how external biases can also negatively impact our career. So first of all, should we get advice? And secondly, how do we go about it smartly so that we get the sound advice?
It's a really great question. So if I was to change one thing in corporate companies, rather than teaching managers about how to give feedback, I would teach employees about how to ask for the feedback that they actually need. So really kind of thinking about how they go into a meeting and ask for somebody to assess their strengths and difficulties in a way that they're going to kind of get, good information. And I think the first thing to say is that when you ask for feedback from anybody, the chance of getting honest negative feedback is really, really low, because the person does not necessarily want to hurt your feelings. So when you're in a feedback meeting, it's really important to signal to the person, or even say explicitly, I'm really here to hear about my strengths as well as my difficulties. And I really want you to be as honest as you can possibly can. And, again, kind of if you think about turns of phrase and kind of framing, you could think about saying to the person, I really want your assessment on what is the likelihood of my career progressing within a certain period of time, and what are the risks that you see to me not getting there. And as soon as you frame it in risk, people feel that it's less personal. It's more about a parameter in your life rather than them actually talking to you on an emotional level. And I think the second thing then is really asking for tangible feedback, that if you've executed the feedback, that you can tick it off a list. So again, if you're working in a big company at the moment, you might want to reflect on the promotions process or the career development reviews that you go through, and ask yourself, when I leave those meetings, or when I succeed or fail in my promotion, do I get clear advice about what went right and what went wrong, so that I can actually see it and tick it off a list? Or does it feel more narrative, where it's actually hard to put my finger on the changes that I want to make? And again, pushing the person who you're asking feedback to go to the tangible, to go to the objective, to go to the things that you will know you've completed them once you've completed them, will allow you to get higher quality feedback.
Great. So you start off, actually, I just sum up my next question, but I'm going to if I turn the table around, many of us get people asking us for advice on their career. So what advice do you have for the career advice giver in terms of how to give a non-biased kind of advice? Because we all full of biases, as you talked about. How should we give advice to help people moving forward?
So I think the first thing is to reflect on the positives and the minuses, or the strengths and the difficulties. And begin by saying to the person that the reason that you're giving them this feedback is because you actually care about them and you want them to move forward. So they know that it's actually a safe space, rather than somebody who's actually picking out negative things, because people are sensitive to feedback. I mean, there's a few great papers that really show that actually feedback is one of the conversations that we have regularly in a corporate environment that has these negative spillovers into people's performance. So that really goes against the grain of what we wanted to achieve. When I get feedback, my performance actually goes down. So to make sure that's happened, in the beginning, you create this psychologically safe space where you're letting the person know that the reason that they're getting this feedback is because you really care about their progression and where they're going. And then forcing yourself to talk about their strengths and difficulties in subcategories to make sure that your biases aren't causing you to leave anything out, so that you're not suffering from availability bias. So just the things that you happen to see in that particular moment. And then that allows you actually give back both balanced feedback and also feedback that will probably touch on things that it wouldn't if you hadn't actually slowed down to make that choice and to kind of create that choice architecture.
Okay. One of the advice that we often hear, and when you read career management books, is always talk about you need to go network.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, from a behavioral science perspective, is network necessary, and is it critical for one's success, career success?
So I think if you imagine why you are successful or unsuccessful today, there's kind of two big things that you want to kind of think about. So the first is, what is the effort that you've put into? So kind of this kind of, physical ability, sitting down to learn new skills, spending time to kind of hone the abilities that you already have. And then the second part is, what were the opportunities that you got to kind of practice those skills or to show off your abilities? Because, you can be a genius, and if you never get an opportunity to show it, then the world would never know. And I think that's why networks are important, because they give you opportunities. So when we make this kind of phrase, you can make your own luck. The biggest way that you can make your own luck in careers is to really have a network that you can turn to if you need opportunities to move forward. And, from my own, if I think about my own career and I reflect on myself kind of 10 years ago versus now, my network is much, much broader and much, much global. And actually it has been really enhanced by kind of COVID-19 pandemic, to be honest. And the network has done two things for me. I'm able to call them up when I needed something and ask for help and ask for an opportunity or ask for a way to pivot or get advice. But secondly, my network has also seen opportunities for me that I didn't necessarily see, which I think is really, really amazing. So if you open up your network and if you invest in, getting to know people on the kind of global, at a global level, I do think you'd be surprised at the doors that actually open for you.
One of the common things that I hear people don't network well is that they think networking is reserved for extrovert versus introverts.
Yep.
What do you have to say, or what advice do you have for someone who's introverts that don't like to meet with people all the time? What advice would you have them in terms of building their network?
So I will answer that question, but I will say, for me, the people who don't network well are the people who expect the network to pay off straight away. So I don't know if you've ever, I've met so many people who meet me and within a day they're asking me for favors that, you would need to know me a long time for me to, to go to those yards for you. So when you're networking, again, it's like the think big message. It isn't in 2 weeks. It isn't in 2 months. This is kind of a long run thing that's reciprocal. So you pay it in each direction. But the introvert and extrovert thing is really interesting. So, I am somebody who in the spirit of Susan Cain is an introvert. So I wake up in the morning and I have a certain amount of energy in my bank, and every person that I meet makes me feel a bit more tired. So if I've met lots of people, I'm exhausted at the end of the day. Whereas an extrovert goes out, they're really excited and they get energy from actually meeting new people. And that does mean that extroverts actually have an edge networking because they like it, right? So, for me, I've had to kind of navigate ways around that. And kind of, again, I'm somebody who, if you meet me in a crowded room, I find it really hard to kind of go out and meet people. And as an introvert, because I know networking is really important, firstly, I developed kind of a solid base of people across the globe who I converse with regularly on a one-to-one basis. So instead of having to go over, stick out my hand in that crowded room, I take up the opportunity to actually meet somebody for coffee. In the olden days, much more on Zoom now, which has allowed me to widen my network. And that helps introverts a lot. I think the second thing is, if you are somebody who just doesn't like networking, bundling it with something that you actually like is really, really helpful. So when I do have to go into those moments where I'm meeting, big groups of people, I will give myself a treat, something that I really, really enjoy later on in the evening. And that bundling in behavioral science has shown us to get us to do things that we don't necessarily like doing. And for the introvert, that is networking. And then also kind of thinking about the last thing, what is it that you don't like about networking? So is it the fact that you are standing in a room on your own looking for somebody to talk to? And there's loads of life hacks, like being the first person to arrive at a conference, because then the second person who walks in is going to speak to you. You know, making sure that you're actually kind of hooked up to lunches and dinners rather than having to stand in that awkward position in a networking room, and also having a buddy. So bringing somebody with you. So, you know, for introverts, it's much easier for them to network, even if they're not walking around as a duo, if there's somebody who they know well in that room that they can go to catch them if things actually get awkward. So, you know, I think it's something that you have to get on with in today's society. Networks are a privilege. And, you know, some of us are born with a privilege of having amazing networks. A lot of us have to build them. And most people who you go up to speak on an evening do want to get to know you. And that awkward chit chat that I dislike does actually fade away. So if there's any introverts in the room, I sympathize, but networking is absolutely part of thinking big.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a really, really important point. Is about building a network is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. It's like any relationship. So I totally agree with you.
Are you an extrovert, Gerald? Because you enjoy networking.
You know, it's actually funny. I thought I was an extrovert until I think I'm very like you. I get really tired at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm at the edge of introvert, extrovert. So what I actually totally agree with you. For me, networking is never about big conferences doing small talks. My networking is about booking one-on-one or two-on-one kind of coffee, small group chats. That actually energized me versus going to big conferences and big networking events.
And I think what you raise, I mean, there's kind of two really important points in what you raise. I think as human beings, we kind of bundle to live. So we like to put people into these categories. They're either introvert or they're extrovert. But the reality is that, you know, some of us will be introvert in particular domains and extrovert in others, and we will crisscross depending on the time of day, whether we've networked before. And learning about that about yourself is really, really important. And I think kind of the second as well is kind of paying attention to what is the type of networking that you actually like doing, and, you know, doubling down on that and maybe avoiding the parts that you don't necessarily like.
Yeah, and I like your advice about bundling, because I think it's much harder just to network it with no specialized topics. So for example, I love food. So I love to get together with other foodies, just talk about food. And that's the natural networking.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
So you also in your book dedicate a whole chapter on time. So talk to us about concept and time. Why did you decide to dedicate a whole chapter on time?
Well, it's funny. So if you write, I mean, again, if you write it like a career book, you kind of make a rod for your own back, because, you know, people will ultimately think that I'm really amazing with time. But if you read the book, it is my biggest battle. So, I mean, if we think about the kind of resources at our fingertips, time is the most precious. It's the thing that we actually can't get back. And it's actually the thing that we squander much more than anything else in our lives, you know. So the chapter that I wrote, I wanted it to kind of align with other books and talk about how do I identify where I'm wasting my time? And I call these time sinkers. And these are activities that you're spending time on in the present day that don't add value to you now or in the future or to anybody else. But more than that, I actually wanted to talk about what are the behavioral science hacks that allows you to take some of those time sinkers, reallocate them to kind of think big journey to making you more successful than you are today and getting you to stick to it. And that's the hardest part. So we all have great intentions. You know, we see this in New Year's Eve, for example, all around the world, people will make resolutions. And, you know, for the majority of countries that have New Year's Eve on the 31st of December, by the 20th of January, we've put those resolutions. And that really shows that our intentions don't match up with our actions. And what I wanted to do was say, okay, if we're allocating this particular time to this activity, how can I make sure that my intention of spending my time in that way actually transpires?
Okay. So if when you talk about time sinkers then, so can you give some example of how you go about kind of managing or hacking your time sinkers for yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, so the first thing is, if you're somebody who squanders time on social media or emailing or spends too much time kind of watching box sets, this probably kind of gives you an idea about what your time sinkers might be. And there's also activities in your work that you might be doing that aren't, enhancing your productivity or adding value to the organization. And again, identifying those. And then it's once you've identified them, how do you actually stick to the plan? So I talk about carrots and sticks. So the idea that, if you think about, and we've already spoken about bundling, which is the perfect carrot. If you think about, if you're going to spend your time on something that's really, really hard, how can you incentivize yourself to get there? And a carrot is a perfect idea. If you think about sticks, then that's about punishing yourself if you don't necessarily show up. So, people who put sticks into their life will say, if I don't network, 3 times a week for this particular month, then I'm not going to allow myself go to the concert, or I'm not going to go out for a dinner with my friends. So I'm going to give myself that punishment. And there's even a website called stick.com that forces you to stick to that punishment. So, I guess the problem is I might promise you, Gerald, that I won't go to the concert, but it may be I kind of renege on it. And there's now actually websites that will force you to kind of to stick to your plans. I like the compromise effect, which is one of the effects in behavioral sciences that's really established in purchasing that I've applied to my time. As humans, even though we make to-do lists that we have to cross off yes and no, the binary nature of those makes us much more likely not to fulfill the to-do list. But if you actually give yourself different allocations of things that you have to do, so in the simplest case, you might think about a high impact, a high output activity, a medium output activity, or a low output activity. So for example, writing 10,000 words versus writing 5,000 words versus writing 1,000 words. As human beings, if we make that list, we're much more likely to do the medium task, which I find really interesting. So I've tried this on myself and I've tried it on my friends. And initially when I started it, I used to say, maybe I'm just a very average person because I always do the average output, but it's been repeated again in other people, which is quite exciting. So changing your to-do list to have categories of types of output. And once you do an output, whether it's low, medium, or high, giving yourself that treat if you've decided to have a carrot, and not allowing yourself to be punished if you've decided to have a stick is really important.
Okay. So I'm going to ask 2 more specific examples, which I think is big for everybody. One is social media. So yeah. I think social media is a blessing and a curse, sometimes from a time perspective. So I know that in the book, you talk specifically about how you manage trying to not be distracted in answering emails. So can you just highlight that example for audiences, because there may be some tips where people could use.
Yeah, so mine was email, but it's the same thing for social media. So basically, I took off all of the alerts from my mobile phone. So I didn't allow myself get emails, didn't allow myself get alerts from Twitter. I deleted the apps. I had an iPad that I would use then if I was to check emails and go on social media that was far away from me in the house. So if I was working on a particular day, in order for me to actually check my social media or check my emails, which is the thing that I love the most, I had to physically actually go and get it. And that friction, so by increasing the cost by that small amount, was enough to allow me break my habit of checking emails too much. Now, I still didn't stick to my plan. So it wasn't the case that, I planned to work for 3 hours, email and social media free, and I stuck to it for 3 hours. But over time I got there. But even in the beginning, my productivity was enhanced once I got through the nail biting stage. And I think that's also why we quit the, for some people who were on the line tonight, they will ultimately be addicted to social media, emailing. You recognize it in yourself if you say, okay, I spent too much time on it and I'm not even really sure that I enjoy it. I'm not even really sure. I'm scrolling. I'm mindless scrolling. So when you stop doing that, you stop getting the happiness hit, which has been shown actually in some studies to be the same as taking cocaine, if you could imagine. So, kind of that mindless scrolling and hearing a ding is the same as taking a hard drug with respect to the response that we're having in our body. So again, go through that phase. And when you come out the other side, you ultimately will see big productivity gains.
Thank you. There's someone in the audience agree with you, your advice of using multiple devices.
Oh, fantastic. Let me know how you get on if you haven't used it before.
So the other one is definitely meetings. So as a professional and working at corporations, sometimes it's like death by meetings.
Yes.
So how do you go about managing your time in useless meetings?
So the first thing is, so I do mention this in the book in a different category, but I mean, if, you know, think about the last meeting that you were actually in, and was there one person who was the decision maker, who spoke the longest in the room? Were there particular people who spoke without thinking? You know, how did the meeting actually unfold? Were you bored? Were you scrolling through your phone? And, you know, it's easy to see in any, I can walk into any corporation, there's examples of meetings being run badly. So I would ultimately cancel the meetings that don't have an agenda. I would cancel meetings where there is kind of low stakes decisions being made. You know, I sat in a meeting myself in my university where we spoke about bicycle racks and how many bicycle racks should go in front of the university. Now, I think if trust is so low in a group that you have to sit together and make that decision, there's something wrong in the organization. We should trust somebody to make those decisions on our behalf. And then I think that we can have larger meetings for what's actually important. And what is important is, you know, how do we come to creative, how do we create atmospheres that allow us to have creative product design? How do we innovate? How do we assess risk? How do we assess risk better? How do we choose projects? And those are the meetings that you actually want to be in. And I think if you're in a meeting where somebody is giving you information that you could have read in a paper, that's a waste of time. Those are all things that should actually happen beforehand. So, but in the book, which is why Gerald asked me, I do talk about the fact that I avoid meetings where I know my voice won't be heard. I avoid meetings where I know for sure there isn't going to be an agenda and we're going to focus on small stakes decisions, because I trust my colleagues with those small stakes decisions and it gives me my time back.
Fantastic, thank you. I just read a quote today by Adam Grant talking about a 10-year career plan is a mistake. So what's your point of view of that based on your experience and your research?
So he's right. So, I mean, so if you think about, so the message in Think Big is for you to think about what if it all works out, where will you actually end up? And there's a section in the book where I talk about that you shouldn't be blindsided by this kind of one vision of going straight down a road and heading to one particular outcome. So how do you recognize other opportunities that are around you, for example, that your diverse network will actually bring? So I think the 10-year plan is a mistake in the sense that if you stick to it very, very rigidly, you're going to end up actually throwing away opportunities, and you're going to possibly end up in a job where you like the title, but you don't necessarily like the tasks. But having a Think Big goal that's in the future, that's in the medium term, even if it's 10 years, and navigating towards that, paying attention to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, paying attention to other opportunities that will allow you to come your way, will get you further in life and make you much more successful than not having that plan. So I think about the idea of a 10-year plan. For what Adam would say, I would say 5-year plan is probably the maximum that you should be doing, as getting in your car and starting to drive down the road, and you're starting to get closer to your destination, but maybe you've picked the wrong destination and you change your mind along the way.
So with the speed of change in the environment that we live in, and sometimes people do change from a preference perspectives. So how often should we reflect on a me plus kind of vision?
So I think firstly, if you know the tasks that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and you can articulate those. So if I asked you tonight, you know, what are the 3 main tasks that you actually do in your job? And what are the 3 main skills that allow you to do those tasks? And you're able to answer that clearly, that helps you in the 4th Industrial Revolution, because it means it makes you much more resilient, because you can change jobs. You're not stuck to a title. So people who are stuck to a job title are much less resilient in the 4th Industrial Revolution. But I think it's also worth paying attention to what are the type of skills that are becoming much more valuable as time goes on. So, you know, at the moment, we're doing some research where we're pricing skills in the job market, which means that we look at job adverts and we look at the pay that's actually coming to them, and we look to see if we take those skills and narrow them down, what's the unit price for each skill. And things that are growing are resilience, adaptability, curiosity. So we used to call them soft skills. I heard somebody the other day call them power skills, because, you know, they do kind of give you superpowers if you actually, if you have them. But whatever you want to call them, investing in those makes a lot of sense. So kind of paying attention to what are the trends that are coming on stream that you can start upskilling yourself now, so that in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time, even if you love your job and the job goes, you have somewhere to move to.
So there are people potentially online that are maybe at the end of their career where they're actually looking at a retirement. So can Think Big be applied to life planning versus just career planning?
So when I launched the book at the LSE, a gentleman who I know who was a chair of a committee that I was on wrote me an email and said, I really like the book, but your next book should be Think Broad, Take Small Steps, and get the retirement that you want. Because, and he's right. So, I think in some ways, yes, the principles can be applied to somebody who's transitioning to retirement. But the smartest thing when you're transitioning to retirement is to think about what are the portfolio of activities that I'm actually going to do. And these can be tasks in the way that are described in Think Big. But I think broader than that, there might be 4 or 5, kind of jobs that you'll ultimately take on, a mix of volunteering with sitting on boards and some other things that you might want to do in your retirement. And how do you actually get to that? So if I was to write Think Broad, I would change chapter 2 to really talk about this kind of diverse portfolio of careers.
Okay, fantastic. So in terms of development, so one of the things that I think the concept with, especially in the HR world, we talked about is continuous learning in terms of enhancing yourself. What's your view of that in terms of career?
I think it's becoming a must. I think it really is becoming a must. So I think, we're entering a really interesting part in the world where acquiring knowledge doesn't really have a premium anymore. So simply knowing something isn't really worth anything, because even though I don't know it, I can Google it. But I think the ability to put knowledge together across a number of domains, the premium on that is absolutely growing. And I think when you're undertaking continuous education, really paying attention to, am I learning about critical thinking? Am I learning about, how to actually getting people to collaborate? Or am I focusing on learning something that I'm kind of learning and churning, regurgitating in a textbook? And if your continuous learning is the first type, then it's absolutely worth its weight in gold. And, I think at the LSE, we have a huge executive education program. And I hope nobody from the LSE is on tonight, but what really makes me happy is that a lot of this is becoming available for free, which means that people online can, access most of the content that we would actually do at the LSE behind a paywall now for free, which is really, really fantastic, allowing you to actually do multiple degrees over your lifestyle and lifetime. And I'm really interested now in systems thinking. So the idea that, can I get to a place where I know the principal ideas across all of the major disciplines? And can I actually sit back and reflect on how they interlink to each other? And I think that's the person of the future. That's kind of who you want around the table, is somebody who has a T. So I'm deep in behavioral science and economics, but I'm broad across those other systems.
So from a company perspective, let's look at it from an organizational perspective. So a lot of the organizations have initiatives in helping employees to plan their career, to progress in their career. What advice would you have if there's executive in the audiences that they're thinking about helping employees and provide support for employees as an organizational context? What recommendation would you have for them in terms of how should they go about supporting individuals building their career and meeting their aspirations?
So I'm convinced that in companies, one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we talk to people about their next promotion or the next kind of small milestone that they'll actually go through, rather than getting them. I mean, I call it a think big goal, but where do they actually want to end up? I know there's research to show that the people who come into organizations and say, I want to be the managing director, I want to be the CEO, I want to really kind of get to the top of this organization, even if they end up in an entirely different job with an entirely different title, they are more successful than individuals who have the shorter run perspective. They're more successful than the people who come in and say, how do I get to the next promotion? And I would change career planning to internalize that. So getting people to have a career development review that doesn't map out their next 1 year of milestones, but has a longer run perspective, and thinking about what type of things in the company, continuous education, networking opportunities, shadowing, what are the things in the company that would allow the person move towards themselves in the future. So it's good for the individual, but I would bet you, because I haven't seen a study that proves this, but I would bet you it's good on retention, because if I'm getting opportunities to stretch myself to something that's much further down the road, I'm going to be much happier in an organization.
Okay. So Grace, there's a question from the audience. Do you think there's a value in engaging career coach to assist us do some of the recommendations that you make in your book?
The answer is yes, but the problem with coaches is that the quality varies greatly. So, there are kind of, there are some barriers to entry in coaching, but there's so many different coaching qualifications. It's very hard for you to assess whether or not a coach will actually work for you. So my tip is to meet the coach. And, sometimes a coach is high quality, but you just won't necessarily gel with them. I think the good quality coaches these days will always offer you a session that's free in the beginning with no obligation. So go for coaches who allow you to meet them for 30 minutes or more, and look to see whether or not you gel at a personal level, but don't let your biases get in the way. So just because somebody feels familiar to you and you're enjoying the conversation, take a step back and think about what can they actually offer me that I need in this particular situation. So again, if you're thinking about coaching, are you trying to improve your personal brand? Are you trying to improve your public speaking skills? Are you trying to improve how you manage people? And do they have a track record in that skill that you're trying to prove? Because when we think about these things that we do for self-improvement, evaluating their success becomes really important. So if I were to take on a coach today, I would have some ideas about where I would actually like to go with the coach. And I would be very reflective on that journey about whether or not they're taking me in places that actually has benefit given the cost.
I guess to follow up on that, Grace, just to the theme of biases you talked about, I think we should treat coaches probably just one perspective, and if you have a diverse network, you can always double check those advices before you actually proceed the direction.
Absolutely. And some people will be lucky enough that they can be coached by their network, so they don't necessarily have to go and pay. But I think the evidence on whether coaching actually works for careers is mixed, and I think that mixed ultimately comes down to the quality of the coach.
Okay, so we have about 8 minutes. So I have 2 more questions for you, Grace. So one is that in the book you talked about luck and effort. Yeah. The concept of luck. Can you just explain that a little bit to the audience? What is that all about, and how can we apply that in the career management?
Yeah, so people when they look at their careers, they get over focused on success versus failure. So something will happen to them and they'll label themselves a success, or they label themselves a failure, and they'll beat themselves up if they failed, and they'll celebrate if they succeed. And Behavioral Science 101 teaches us actually that's not how we should think about outcomes. We should look at an outcome and disentangle it to, was it my input that actually got me to my success, or did I just get lucky? So you can still celebrate your success if you got lucky, but really be cognizant of the fact that it wasn't you who allowed that outcome to actually to reveal itself. And it's the same with failure. So paying attention to failure with respect to, did I contribute to the outcome? Was it my input, or did I just get unlucky? And you could be somebody who comes up against discrimination, and I hate to call it bad luck. We would put it in that bucket this evening. You could be somebody who comes up against somebody who's deciding whether or not to invest in your business, and the people were hungry around that time, so they didn't give you a fair shake. And separating out your responsibility from the universe and what surrounds you will make sure that you actually learn for the next experience. So you're learning from your failures. Maybe you weren't prepared, and maybe you weren't prepared, and you're learning from your successes.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe one last question. So if someone want to embark on the Think Big journey today, so what are the 3 things that you want them to take away from tonight's talk that they can actually start their journey?
Well, first, you can buy the book. It's on Amazon, so that's a good, takeaway. A very shameless piece of self promotion. Yeah. Oh, actually, Mary had preempted it. Yes, you can absolutely buy it on. You can absolutely buy it on Amazon. But the 3 things to take away. So I think the first thing is, I think it's really good for everybody to think big. So think about, what if it all worked out? What is your blue sky thinking? I think the second part is to think about, what are the small steps, the habits that you can embed in your life now, today, that won't necessarily feel like a huge effort because it's not taking too much time from your routine, but are pointing you in the direction of that blue sky thinking goal. And I think the third, which we actually haven't spoken about too much, which I write about in the book, is what are you doing for your own resilience on a day-to-day basis? So I think one of the interesting things to come out of kind of literature recently, and there's another book that I'm reading at the moment called Work Won't Love You Back, which really speaks to this at kind of more depth than I do. But if you're passionate about something, if you find your passion, you are then actually much more at risk of burnout as compared to somebody who doesn't actually like their job. And the reason is, you'll put in too much time, you'll put in too many hours, and you'll end up exhausted, actually. So really making sure that you're balancing the scales when you go on a think big journey. You know, my wish for everyone in the audience is that they either have now or will find a job where they really enjoy the task, so they're getting paid for what they love. But part of the problem with that, the backfiring effect, is that you might spend too much time at your job. You might burn out, you know, you might sacrifice other domains in life, and paying attention to that. So think big, take small steps, but do take care of your well-being.
Yeah, so Grace, when I give career advice to people, I actually talk about career is only one small piece of their pie as a whole life. So sometimes people need to dial back on their career and put more into taking care of an elderly or a child versus a career. So I think that's a really interesting concept. And it's really important to think about the whole life versus just a portion of your life.
Absolutely. So thinking of this kind of long run, you know, I think we, in most societies, we're fascinated with instant happiness these days. But I think the happiest people are those who actually, you know, who meditate, they practice gratitude and take that longer run perspective. So, you know, it doesn't come naturally to me in my personality, but I do slow down. So I come out of my fast brain, I slow down to put in steps to make sure that I kind of mimic them enough times that I don't end up being exhausted.
So from a last minute kind of housekeeping question, Grace, just in case in the audience that people want to connect with you, have further input or questions, how could they go about connecting with you?
Yeah, so my website is gracelordan.com, and my email address, my Twitter details, my LinkedIn are all on there. So, you know, I'm active on LinkedIn a lot, Twitter a medium amount, and Instagram a very small amount, but I would love to connect with you on whichever one is your preference. And do reach out by email if you have any questions after tonight's talk.
Thank you very much, Grace. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for giving an hour of your time that you can't get back.
And thank you to everyone for the privilege of their time, for staying to the end. It's harder on the audience end. So hopefully I'll get to see you all in person someday.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gerald.
Okay, bye.
Bye.